January 5, 1943. Off the coast near Guadalcanal in the South Pacific, as dawn broke, shadows stretched across the deck of the USS Helena, a cruiser bristling with activity as crew members carried out their assigned tasks. Radar operators kept watch over their screens for any potential threats. The war in the Pacific had escalated to an extreme level, and everyone aboard was acutely aware that death could come from above at any moment. During the preceding night, Helena had engaged in a bombing raid on Japanese positions at Mund Airfield on New Georgia. As Task Force 67.2 began its southern retreat, the crew stayed vigilant, knowing full well from past experiences that swift and deadly retaliation often followed such operations. 4 Japanese dive bombers materialized on the horizon, their distinctive shapes easily recognizable by Allied forces. These aircraft were designated IED-3A models but referred to as valves among Allied personnel. Though older designs and slower than newer WWII versions, they remained formidable in skilled hands. The alarm blared throughout the ship, signaling battle stations. Gun crews hurriedly took their places as the Japanese planes dove towards the American task force, striking HM and ZS Achilles before starting their retreat. Then came an event that would revolutionize warfare. As the Japanese bombers pulled away, believing they had evaded American gunfire, Helena's 5-inch 38 caliber guns commenced firing. Rather than unleashing a frenzied volley of hundreds of rounds as naval doctrine suggested, just a few shells were launched. The gunners observed in awe as these projectiles raced towards the distant aircraft, now over 4 miles away. What transpired next was nothing short of miraculous. The shells detonated near the planes without making direct contact. One bomber caught fire and plunged into the sea. Shortly thereafter, another followed suit. The gunners were left staring in astonishment. They had just witnessed an unprecedented event in naval warfare. Without hitting the aircraft directly, they managed to shoot down enemy planes from a great distance due to the shells exploding near their targets. There was no need for precise timing, guesswork about altitude and speed, or frantic adjustments of fuse settings. The weapons seemed to know exactly when to detonate on their own. Commander W.S. Parsons, who chronicled this engagement, observed that what had just transpired was extraordinary. This wasn't a matter of luck. It was the result of precision kills achieved by a weapon capable of detecting its proximity to targets and detonating at the optimal moment for maximum damage. The technology behind this was so secret that its security classification ranked second only to the atomic bomb project. It was considered so revolutionary that military leaders feared its capture more than any other piece of technology. This device proved 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional ammunition. Despite its immense potential to save American lives, it took nearly 2 years for high-ranking military officials to authorize widespread use. This is the tale of the proximity fuse, a weapon initially kept under wraps by the Navy and seen as too dangerous for deployment on land by Pentagon officials. It was a secret that would ultimately contribute significantly to winning World War II. To grasp why such a powerful weapon was restricted, it's essential to understand what made it so extraordinary. Before 1943, firing down aircraft with anti-aircraft artillery was an exercise in mathematical frustration and lethal inefficiency. The issue was straightforward but seemed unsolvable. The expanse of the sky is immense compared to the relatively diminutive size of aircraft that traverse it at great speeds through 3-dimensional space. Artillery shells, once launched, adhere to a fixed ballistic trajectory that cannot be altered mid-flight. Early anti-aircraft systems were equipped with 2 types of fuses, each suffering from significant drawbacks. Contact fuses would only explode upon physical impact with the target, necessitating an accurate hit on a swiftly moving object, often more than several miles away. The statistical likelihood of achieving such precision was virtually nil. Time delay fuses detonated at a predetermined moment after firing based on calculations that accounted for the aircraft's altitude, speed, direction, rate of climb or descent, wind conditions, and the shell's trajectory. Even minor errors in these complex calculations could result in the shell exploding harmlessly far from its intended target while the enemy aircraft continued unscathed. The early years of war brought discouraging statistics to light. By some estimates, during World War II's initial stages in Europe, it took roughly 20,000 rounds of anti-aircraft ammunition to down a single enemy plane. Some campaigns, like those in Norway and the Battle of Britain, reported even more staggering figures, reaching as high as 100,000 rounds per kill. Even optimistic projections based on experienced gun crews indicated that at least 500 rounds were required for each aircraft destroyed. The immense expenditure of ammunition yielded minimal results. Naval vessels and ground installations exhausted their supplies without making substantial impacts against enemy air forces. Returning ships would often find themselves low on ammunition despite failing to repel incoming aircraft. The toll of this inefficiency was felt both in human lives and military equipment, as evidenced by the heavy losses suffered during Japanese attacks on American naval forces in the Pacific Theater. Events like those at Pearl Harbor, the Battle of the Coral Sea, and Midway illustrated how inadequate anti-aircraft defenses could leave sailors vulnerable to relentless aerial assaults. German warplanes posed a constant threat to Allied convoys crossing the Atlantic Ocean, sinking merchant ships laden with essential supplies destined for Britain and the Soviet Union. The crews of these Allied vessels endured relentless aerial assaults, while equipped with defensive weaponry that offered little more protection than small arms could provide. Many sailors perished in burning ships as supply vessels carrying critical provisions such as food, fuel, and ammunition sank before they could reach their intended ports. The success of various military campaigns hinged on the ability to defend against these determined air attacks, a capability that the Allies lacked. Scientists and military strategists from all combatant nations acknowledged the urgent need for an innovative solution. Discussions about proximity fuses, devices capable of detecting targets and detonating at optimal range for maximum destructive power, had circulated in military publications and research labs for years. In 1939, spurred by the escalating threat posed by German air forces, British researchers began preliminary work on this technology. German efforts were equally extensive, with over 30 different proximity fuse initiatives documented by some sources, indicating as many as 50 distinct research endeavors. Meanwhile, Japanese engineers experimented with acoustic and magnetic detection systems. Each nation understood the revolutionary impact that such a weapon could have. However, translating theoretical potential into practical application proved immensely challenging due to the technological limitations of the era. Despite significant investment, every major power encountered considerable difficulties in developing effective proximity fuses. German researchers launched an especially vigorous campaign, launching between 30 and 50 separate projects by 1940. Examples include Russell AG's Kranich acoustic fuse designed to detect aircraft through sound waves, AEG Berlin's Fuchs program investigating radio proximity detection akin to the American approach, and the Grimm project examining electromagnetic detection methods. Additionally, Rheinmetall Borsig worked on the Kogelach electrostatic fuse that relied on detecting changes in electrical fields caused by approaching targets. Despite these extensive research efforts, German initiatives were halted in 1940 following direct orders from Hitler, who insisted all resources be redirected towards projects with a higher likelihood of rapid production within 6 months. This decision, fueled by excessive confidence following initial successes, turned out to be disastrous. By 1944, when German research resumed in the face of deteriorating strategic circumstances, it was already too late. Rheinmetall had managed to test fire-functional prototypes by late 1944, but their facilities were captured before production could commence. Not a single proximity fuse developed by Germany saw operational use during World War II, whereas the Americans manufactured over 22 million units. Meanwhile, Japan experimented with acoustic and magnetic detection systems through its Naval Technical Research Institute. They fully grasped the concept, yet their industrial base was insufficient for producing miniaturized electronics on a large scale. Japanese vacuum tubes were larger, less reliable, and unable to endure the required stress levels. Consequently, their efforts yielded only laboratory novelties with no prospect of mass production. A proximity fuse needed to incorporate a compact radar system capable of detecting aircraft and calculating distances in real time. This intricate device had to fit into an artillery shell measuring just 5 inches in diameter. It also had to withstand acceleration forces up to 20,000 times gravity when fired from naval guns and spin at 25,000 revolutions per minute during flight. Furthermore, it needed to operate flawlessly under various weather conditions such as rain, snow, tropical humidity, Arctic cold, and the chaotic environment of combat. Additionally, it had to be cost-effective enough for mass production in the millions. Many experts deemed this challenge insurmountable with contemporary technology. Vacuum tubes, essential components of electronic circuits at that time, were fragile glass containers prone to shattering under much less stress than experienced by artillery shells. Even reinforced tubes failed when subjected to a fraction of the forces involved in firing from naval guns. Batteries powerful enough for radar systems were too large to fit within artillery shell's nose. The antenna required was impractically small while still maintaining functionality. Lastly, safety mechanisms preventing premature detonation had to work perfectly every time without fail. A single malfunction could wipe out the entire crew operating the weapon. This advanced technology had to be packed into a space no larger than a coffee can and then fired from a gun with explosive force. September 1940, during the Tizard mission, a critical intelligence exchange when Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany. The British shared their early research findings with American scientists. Sir Henry Tizard traveled to Washington carrying a black metal box filled with some of Britain's most confidential military secrets. The documents included initial designs for a proximity fuse, theoretical calculations, and reports on failed experiments. However, the British acknowledged that they lacked both the industrial capacity and expertise in miniaturized electronics to turn these theories into practical applications. With their factories already overwhelmed producing conventional weapons, the task of developing the proximity fuse was handed over to American researchers. The National Defense Research Committee, established on June 27, 1940, entrusted the project to Dr. Merle Tuve at Johns Hopkins University's Applied Physics Laboratory. This decision proved wise, as Tuve had extensive experience studying the ionosphere using radio waves, making him well suited for this task. He gathered a team of physicists, engineers, and inventors from various universities and private companies. Their work was shrouded in secrecy comparable to that of the Manhattan Project. The project received security clearance second only to that of atomic bomb research. Factory workers often had no clue about what they were manufacturing, as components were produced separately with misleading names. To conceal its true purpose even from many military personnel handling it, the fuse was given the deliberately vague code name Variable Time LVT. Dr. Tuve's team, known as Section T, encountered one technical crisis after another, and each solution revealed new challenges. In August 1940, the team began with only 4 scientists, but it eventually expanded to almost 1,000 researchers and support personnel. Their work took place in converted buildings at Johns Hopkins University and the Department of Terrestrial Magnetism at the Carnegie Institution. Security measures were extremely strict. Individuals working on different components often had no knowledge of how their contributions fit into the larger project. Standard vacuum tubes would shatter instantly due to the immense acceleration forces generated by gun firing. Early tests yielded numerous failures. One such test involved firing a regular radio tube from a cannon, and upon retrieval, nothing remained except glass dust and twisted wires. Even those marketed as ruggedized for use in all drilling equipment disintegrated catastrophically. The extreme acceleration caused glass to behave like liquid, leading to internal components telescoping into each other and delicate wire grids collapsing instantly. The turning point came through collaboration with the private sector. Sylvania Electric Products partnered with Section T engineers to develop special miniaturized tubes featuring reinforced glass, multiple support structures, and shock-resistant internal components. These new tubes were entirely unprecedented, starting with hearing aid tubes, the smallest available at the time. They made extensive modifications by adding additional glass supports at critical stress points, shortening lead wires to just 3/8 of an inch to reduce flexing using special tungsten alloy filaments instead of standard materials, and filling them with precise gas mixtures to prevent electrical arcing under stress. Despite these improvements, even the enhanced tubes experienced repeated failures in early tests. In a particularly demoralizing series of experiments late in 1941, 900 consecutive tubes were destroyed without achieving any success. Engineers exhausted every conceivable solution. They inserted the tubes into wax, only to find that the heat had caused it to melt. All was then tried but resulted in leaks. Rubber mixtures were tested next, yet they broke down over time. Various types of plastic were evaluated, and all cracked when subjected to stress tests. An engineer proposed suspending the tubes in mercury, but this proved too heavy for practical use. Another idea involved using human blood plasma as a cushioning agent, which was tested but found impractical. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Dr. James Van Allen, who would later become famous for discovering the Van Allen radiation belts, at that time was a young physicist on the team. He suggested combining wax and oil in specific proportions with the tubes positioned at precise angles to evenly distribute stress. After numerous iterations, they discovered that when the tubes were mounted at 30 Kelvin relative to the shell's axis and enveloped in a mixture of sarin wax and transformer oil, they could withstand approximately 70% of test firings. This solution was deemed adequate for wartime production. The challenge with batteries seemed equally daunting using traditional methods. Standard batteries were too bulky and failed to activate quickly enough. However, the ultimate solution proved both ingenious and counterintuitive. Engineers devised a small glass vial containing liquid electrolyte. This vial remained inert until the moment of firing. Upon discharge, the intense acceleration shattered the glass, and centrifugal force caused by the shell's rotation propelled the liquid into contact with carefully positioned metal plates. This initiated a chemical reaction that produced an electrical current. Essentially, the battery activated itself due to the very forces acting upon it during firing. It was an ingenious solution that turned its own challenge into a strength. Developing this radar system demanded groundbreaking innovations in electronics technology. Conventional radar setups were massive installations weighing several tons, but the proximity fuse radar had to fit inside a space roughly the size of an ice cream cone. The device needed a shared antenna barely larger than a pencil for both transmitting and receiving signals. Additionally, it had to differentiate between its transmitted signal and the faint reflected echo from potential targets. Engineers in Section T devised a remarkable autodyne detector circuit capable of detecting subtle variations in signal strength as the shell neared its target. Once the returning signal surpassed a predetermined threshold, indicating that the target was within lethal range, the firing mechanism would activate, setting off an explosion. However, mere proximity detection was insufficient. The fuse had to be intelligent enough to avoid false triggers. For example, a shell fired over water should not detonate due to reflections from waves, and one launched in rain needed to differentiate between droplets and aircraft. Moreover, it had to distinguish friendly planes from enemy aircraft, though this proved impractical and led to strict operational guidelines. To address these issues, engineers incorporated advanced wave suppression circuits that could ignore prolonged signals from stationary objects while remaining responsive to the distinctive echoes of moving aircraft. Safety features were also meticulously designed to prevent accidental detonations. The fuse remained inactive until fired and would not activate until after a certain distance had been covered, typically 700 yards, from the gun, ensuring it was safely away from friendly ships or personnel before arming. This complex process involved multiple sequential conditions being met, with redundant safety measures in place to ensure absolute reliability. The battery contained inert chemicals that became active only upon firing when an ampule shattered, initiating the necessary electrical connection for operation. The radio transmitter activated once the shell reached the appropriate rotational speed thanks to a centrifugal switch. For the weapon to become operational, several independent safety systems had to synchronize flawlessly. If any single safety circuit failed, it would result in an inert projectile that safely dropped into the sea, safeguarding both the gun crew and the confidential information contained within the fuse. The first successful trial occurred on August 12, 1942, when the U.S. Cleveland, recently launched as a light cruiser, carried out live firing exercises during its shakedown cruise in Chesapeake Bay. Radio-controlled drone aircraft were used as targets. The outcomes surpassed all initial expectations. On the inaugural day alone, gunners managed to shoot down 3 drones with just 4 bursts. Despite being small, fast, and highly maneuverable, these drones succumbed easily to proximity-fused shells. The test's success was so remarkable that the Navy cancelled the planned second day of testing and immediately authorized mass production. By January 1943, following an intensive 18-month development period involving thousands of experiments, the team had achieved a reliability rate exceeding 50% in firing tests. Under normal circumstances, this level of performance would have been considered inadequate. However, given the severe losses inflicted on American forces by enemy air attacks, the Navy deemed a 50% success rate for such an innovative weapon to be acceptable. Production of the Mark 32 VT fuse commenced in November 1942. The first operational units reached Pearl Harbor that same month, transported under tight security and stored in sealed containers. By year's end, the Pacific Fleet had received 4 500 fuses, which were allocated exclusively to select cruisers and battleships. Security measures surrounding this new weapon were unprecedentedly stringent. VT fused shells could only be deployed over deep waters where the depth exceeded 100 fathoms. Any undetonated duds would sink to the ocean floor, securing their secrets from enemy discovery. Ships were strictly instructed never to fire these fuses in shallow water or near land. The consequences for disregarding these directives were harsh, potentially leading to a court-martial. Commanding officers had to personally authorize each use of the fuses. The components were kept in secure magazines guarded by Marine personnel due to their critical importance and high value. Any chance of the technology falling into enemy hands was deemed too risky. In January 1943, the USS Helena conducted its first real combat test with the new fuses near Guadalcanal. The results surpassed all initial expectations. With just 22 rounds fired, gunners achieved 2 confirmed kills at ranges that were previously unimaginable. A post-battle report emphasized the remarkable effectiveness of the Mark 32 fused projectile. The Bureau of Ordnance had been eagerly awaiting this kind of combat validation. As a result, production was rapidly increased, with contracts expanding from $60 million to over $200 million within months. Throughout 1943, VT fused ammunition demonstrated its worth in numerous engagements across the Pacific theater. Ships equipped with these shells achieved unprecedented success in downing enemy aircraft. That year, naval guns fired 36 370 anti-aircraft rounds. Despite only 25% being proximity fuses, they accounted for 51% of all aircraft destroyed. The statistics were compelling and unequivocal. Time-fused shells required an average of 508 rounds to destroy one aircraft, whereas VT fused shells needed just 155 rounds per kill. This new technology was more than 3 times as effective as conventional ammunition. Furthermore, the lethal fragment area comparison painted an even more impressive picture. A 5-inch time-fused shell, if detonated perfectly, could disperse lethal fragments over about 60 square feet. This task demanded impeccable timing and positioning, which were seldom attained in combat situations. A shell equipped with a proximity fuse would create an explosive kill zone spanning 3,000 square feet, ensuring detonation at the ideal distance from its target. Consequently, the effective target area expanded by a factor of 50 when viewed from the perspective of the explosion's lethality. An aircraft that could have flown unscathed past a time-fused shell now navigated directly into a lethal cloud of shrapnel. During nighttime operations, another critical benefit emerged. Setting the detonation times for time fuses required precise range and altitude data, which became increasingly challenging without visual confirmation in darkness. While radar systems could track aircraft positions, they often failed to offer the necessary precision for accurate timing settings. Proximity fuses completely resolved this issue by ensuring that the shell would locate its target regardless of visibility conditions. When ships employed VT ammunition during nighttime engagements, the kill ratios surged by 370%. Japanese pilots who once relied on darkness for protection suddenly found themselves equally vulnerable as they were in daylight. Admiral William Holtze, overseeing naval forces in the South Pacific, quickly grasped the strategic implications of this development. Throughout 1942, Japanese torpedo planes had inflicted severe damage on American ships under cover of nightfall, where defensive fire was limited to random barrages based on engine noise. With proximity fuses and radar-controlled gun directors, these advantages vanished overnight. Ships could now engage aircraft effectively in complete darkness from extended ranges. As a result, Japanese aircrew losses escalated dramatically. Tactics that had previously been feared became suicide missions. By late 1943, the Japanese Naval Aviation Force was suffering unsustainable casualties, partly due to the effectiveness of proximity fuses. Despite the Navy's ships enjoying significant advantages due to the proximity fuse, Army leaders in Europe faced considerable constraints. They were aware of the existence of this innovative technology through intelligence reports and liaison officers who had reported on its successful use by naval forces. The potential life-saving benefits for soldiers were clear. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, was privy to the statistics showcasing its effectiveness but was denied permission to employ it. The decision-making at the Pentagon hinged on genuine security concerns that appeared valid at the time. Each artillery shell fired over land posed inherent risks. Some would inevitably malfunction and fail to explode, while others might fall into areas controlled by German forces who could potentially recover them. Should the Germans obtain even a single undamaged fuse and successfully reverse engineer it, the ramifications would be severe. They might adapt the technology for their anti-aircraft weaponry, significantly enhancing its defensive capabilities. The American and British strategic bombing operations relied heavily on reaching deep-seated targets within Germany. If German flak batteries were to become 3 to 4 times more potent due to the proximity fuses, bomber losses could escalate dramatically, rendering continued air operations unsustainable. Intelligence indicated that German scientists possessed the capability to dissect and replicate the technology if provided with a working model. Companies like Telefunken and Siemens had advanced research facilities capable of such endeavors. Moreover, there were concerns about potential jamming techniques. Once enemy researchers identified the radio frequency used by the fuses, they might devise electronic countermeasures that could trigger premature detonation or render the fuses ineffective altogether. The benefit would be nullified and the secret exposed without justification. It was therefore wiser to uphold stringent operational security rather than endanger these outcomes. Consequently, the Pentagon sustained its embargo throughout most of 1944. The Navy had the advantage of utilizing proximity fuses over deep waters where faulty shells could sink out of reach. But the Army faced limitations in Europe where every shell was crucial. This decision led to dire consequences measured in American lives lost. Time-fused artillery in the European theater continued to necessitate thousands of rounds for any significant impact. German units moved with relative freedom because Allied artillery lacked the precision needed to halt them effectively. Soldiers perished while a potentially life-saving weapon remained unutilized in storage due to pending authorization that might never be granted. As 944 Army commanders became increasingly exasperated by the discrepancy between their inferior technology and the restricted proximity fuse that could turn the tide of war. General Dwight Eisenhower was acutely aware of what the proximity fuse meant for his troops. He had studied combat data from the Navy demonstrating a threefold increase in effectiveness. Eisenhower knew that American soldiers were needlessly losing their lives due to overly cautious security measures. Given his reputation for not accepting unnecessary casualties lightly, he was determined to address this issue. By late 1944, the military situation had become increasingly perilous despite the success of D-Day landings and the liberation of France in June. German forces were far from being defeated. They had fortified their positions along the German border and prepared for a major counterattack. Unbeknownst to Allied intelligence, Hitler had amassed an assault force comprising nearly 250,000 troops, almost 500 tanks, and around 2,000 artillery pieces in the Ardennes forest. Codenamed Operation Watch on the Rhine, the German plan aimed to split the Allied armies, recapture the strategically vital port of Antwerp, and compel the Western Allies to negotiate a separate peace agreement. On December 16, 1944, at 5:30 am, Germany initiated a sudden offensive. This attack commenced with an overwhelming artillery bombardment lasting for 90 minutes, which caught the American forces off guard. Approximately 250,000 German soldiers, bolstered by secretly assembled tank units, breached the Allied lines over an 80-mile stretch. The assault targeted a lightly defended area occupied by inexperienced and recently deployed divisions. The 106th Infantry Division had only just arrived from the United States, while the 28th Infantry Division was still recovering from significant losses in the Hürken Forest. Elite SS panzer units spearheaded the German advance, driving deep into Allied territory despite adverse weather conditions characterized by low cloud cover and snow, which impeded effective air support. American troops were pushed back in disarray and near panic as they struggled to respond. The Battle of the Bulge had begun. Desperate efforts were made to use artillery to halt the advancing German forces, but time-fused shells proved insufficiently effective against infantry moving across snowy terrain. Observers found it difficult to provide precise range information amid the chaos. Many shells failed to detonate properly due to soft ground and snow, while numerous German soldiers survived bombardments that should have obliterated entire units. Advancing confidently through these challenges, German infantry realized they were not facing a fully effective American artillery response. After 3 days of relentless pressure on Allied forces, General Eisenhower concluded that immediate action was necessary. He urgently contacted the Pentagon via General George Marshall, requesting permission to employ proximity fuses in ground artillery operations. Eisenhower stressed that the strategic importance of this decision outweighed any security concerns, arguing that a German breakthrough to Antwerp could split the Allied armies and jeopardize the entire campaign. Such an outcome, he warned, would prolong the war by months or even years. Despite the peril of captured fuses, the potential consequences were outweighed by the danger of losing the campaign. The Pentagon responded with unprecedented speed. On December 24, 1944, all limitations on proximity fuse usage were lifted. Within hours, 200,000 shells equipped with VT fuses, codenamed POSA-T to preserve some operational secrecy, were distributed from storage and dispatched to the front lines. Artillery units received rapid briefings about the new ammunition. Most gun crews loaded these shells without a full understanding of their mechanics, relying solely on assurances that they were vastly more effective than previous types. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. American artillery, which had previously been ineffective against German infantry, suddenly transformed into a precision weapon. Shells detonated perfectly at treetop level without the need for time fuses. Every round exploded at the ideal height to scatter lethal shrapnel over the largest possible area. German soldiers advancing through snow covered fields found themselves in kill zones with no place to hide. Units that had previously felt relatively safe from timed artillery due to heavy cloud cover, which hindered accurate observation, now faced mass casualties. The adverse weather conditions intended to shield them made little difference to proximity fuses that did not require external targeting data. General George Patton commanded the Third Army as it moved north to rescue encircled American forces at Bastogne. His artillery battalions received proximity-fused ammunition on December 22, and they employed it with devastating effect the very next day. Near Echternach in Luxembourg, a German infantry battalion attempted to cross the Shore River to reinforce their offensive efforts. Patton's artillery units intercepted them while they were vulnerable. The new shells with the distinctive fuses, which Patton referred to as funny fuses in his diary, resulted in 72 enemy casualties by actual body count. This engagement rendered the German battalion ineffective as a fighting force. Patton penned a letter to Major General Levin Campbell Gere, the Chief of Army Ordnance, expressing his astonishment at the innovative weapon. He noted that the shell with its peculiar fuse was exceptionally destructive. In one instance, they intercepted a German battalion attempting to cross the Sire River and inflicted casualties, totaling 7,002 confirmed dead using concentrated fire. Patton believed that once all armies acquire this shell, new methods of warfare would be necessary. He genuinely admired the ingenuity behind it. This assessment came not from someone known for exaggeration, but from a seasoned combat leader offering a sober evaluation. Captured German soldiers following proximity-fused artillery strikes described the attacks with terms of shock and utter despair. A prisoner from the 12th SS Panzer Division remarked that there was no viable defense against these American shells. They detonated overhead without warning, showering down metal shards straight onto exposed targets. Even those in foxholes or trenches previously safeguarded from ground, burst artillery were now vulnerable to lethal shrapnel coming from above. German commanders struggled to devise tactical responses due to the weapon's effectiveness at neutralizing traditional defensive positions that had been reliable since World War I. For example, the 8th Infantry Division engaged a German patrol in the Hürken Forest using timed, coordinated barrages with proximity fuses and discovered all 96 soldiers dead. Every single one was annihilated. As American artillery units mastered employing this new ammunition efficiently, similar devastating outcomes were seen across various battlefronts. By December 25th, any forward progress by German forces ceased. The planned counteroffensive intended to split Allied lines and secure a strategic respite for Germany turned into a disastrous defeat that obliterated the final German reserves. Additionally, Allied anti-aircraft units greatly benefited from relaxed restrictions on employing these advanced shells. German aircraft conducting urgent close support missions encountered the same devastating technology that had decimated Japanese air power in the Pacific theater. During the Battle of the Bulge period, 317 German planes were downed by proximity-fused anti-aircraft artillery. The Luftwaffe's final significant offensive effort crumbled due to losses it could not sustain. By late 1944, air superiority was already precarious for Germany. With these new weapons, it became entirely unattainable. The port of Antwerp showcased another crucial application of proximity-fused technology. This Belgian harbour was indispensable for Allied logistics. Processing more supplies than all other ports combined, its capture in September 1944 was a significant strategic victory. However, the Germans retaliated with concentrated V-1 flying bomb attacks starting in October. These rudimentary cruise missiles, essentially unpiloted aircraft powered by pulsejet engines, flew at speeds close to 400 mph and at altitudes between 2,000 and 3,000 feet. Their speed and low altitude made interception extremely challenging with conventional anti-aircraft defenses. When proximity fuses were introduced for the anti-aircraft batteries defending Antwerp, everything changed instantly. Fuses tailored specifically for low-altitude, high-speed targets transformed the defenses into an almost impenetrable barrier. In a single 24-hour period, 48 out of the first 75 V-1s approaching Antwerp were destroyed by proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire. As gun crews gained experience with the new ammunition, the success rate rose to nearly 80%. The vital supply port remained operational throughout the winter of 1944, allowing Allied forces to maintain their advance into Germany. Without proximity fuses, Antwerp would likely have been rendered unusable, potentially halting the Allied offensive for months. London also greatly benefited from American proximity fuse technology. The British capital had endured extensive damage and civilian casualties under V-1 attacks starting in June 1944, threatening to break civilian morale. British anti-aircraft defenses initially struggled to intercept them effectively, destroying less than 20% of incoming flying bombs. American proximity fuses were swiftly shipped to Britain and incorporated into British anti-aircraft guns, dramatically enhancing their defensive capabilities practically overnight. By August 1944's end, batteries equipped with these innovative fuses intercepted and destroyed nearly 79% of incoming V-1 rockets. In a single week that month, the figure soared to an impressive 82%. Without this technology, London might have faced severe threats necessitating evacuation plans. In the Pacific theater, as Japanese tactics shifted towards coordinated kamikaze attacks, proximity fuses became even more critical. By October 1944, Japan had suffered significant losses in experienced pilots during the Battle of the Philippine Sea and subsequent battles. The Marianas Turkey shoot in June alone claimed over 600 aircraft and most of their skilled aviators, with poorly trained replacements struggling against American fighter escorts and ship defenses. Their loss rates frequently surpassed 80%. On October 19th, Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, commander of the 1st Air Fleet in the Philippines, initiated organized kamikaze units under the name Shimpu Special Attack Corps. This inaugural unit comprised 24 volunteer pilots flying bomb-laden Zero fighters. Onishi informed these volunteers that they were already divine beings without worldly desires and their mission was one way. The first official kamikaze assault took place on October 25th during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Lieutenant Yukioki led a group of 5 attackers against American escort carriers near Samar Island. One kamikaze plane crashed into USS St. Louis hangar deck, causing an explosion that sank the ship within half an hour, resulting in the deaths of 143 crew members. Other kamikaze units also damaged the carriers Santee, Suwannee, Kitkan Bay, and Kinanin Bay. The psychological effect on American sailors was immediate and severe. This was unlike any form of warfare they had encountered before. Naval strategists quickly grasped that proximity fuses would be crucial in countering this new menace. Urgent directives were issued to equip as many ships as possible with VT ammunition, and production priorities were adjusted accordingly. Ships bound for the Pacific received preferential allocation of proximity-fused shells. Gun crews underwent specialized training focused on engaging kamikaze aircraft, stressing sustained firing at maximum range using proximity fuses to establish a wall of exploding projectiles. The kamikaze threat was both terrifying and initially highly effective. Pilots who embraced death willingly could not be dissuaded by defensive fire. They would fly straight through flak and fighters, absorbing damage that would cause conventional attackers to retreat. All they needed was basic control to reach their targets in the final moments. In October 1944 at Leyte Gulf, kamikaze attacks sank the escort carrier US SAT low and damaged several other vessels. The psychological impact on American sailors was profound. Proximity fuses were found to be particularly effective against kamikazes due to combat analysis revealing certain key factors. The suicidal nature of these attacks meant that Japanese pilots flew straight forward, predictable trajectories directly toward their targets without deviation or last-minute evasion maneuvers. This predictability played directly into the strengths of proximity fuses. Ships armed with 5-inch guns firing VT ammunition required only 310 rounds to down a kamikaze compared to 624 rounds needed for conventional aircraft. The simpler flight paths gave the fuses more opportunities to detect and neutralize the incoming threats. The Battle of Okinawa from April to June 1945 was the ultimate test of anti-aircraft defenses against mass kamikaze attacks. Japan deployed everything at its disposal to challenge the Allied fleet supporting the invasion. Over a period of 3 months, nearly 2,000 kamikaze sorties struck at American naval forces in an intense and desperate battle. These large-scale assaults were known as Kikusui or floating chrysanthemum, with the Japanese launching 10 major offensives. On April 6th alone, 355 kamikaze aircraft targeted the fleet. The sheer scale of these attacks was unprecedented and initially overwhelming for American naval forces. During this campaign, American ships suffered their highest casualties in the Pacific theater. A total of 26 vessels were sunk, while another 164 sustained damage. Nearly 5,000 sailors lost their lives and an additional 5,000 were injured. However, without proximity fuses, the losses could have been far more catastrophic. Between July and December of 1945 alone, nearly 2/3 of all VT fuses used throughout the entire war were deployed in waters around Okinawa, accounting for over 200 downed Japanese aircraft that might otherwise have crashed into American ships. Despite these heavy losses, the invasion succeeded, but at a significant cost that influenced future plans for an invasion of Japan. Post-war analysis by an operations research group concluded definitively that proximity fused shells were 3 to 4 times as effective in anti-aircraft roles compared to timed fuses. In specific scenarios, this effectiveness was even more pronounced. For example, 5-inch naval guns firing conventional time, fused ammunition needed about 2,000 rounds to destroy a single aircraft under typical combat conditions. Using proximity fuses reduced that requirement to between 300 and 600 rounds, depending on the tactical situation. Against kamikaze attacks specifically, the advantage was even more notable, with some engagement showing 5 to 10 times greater effectiveness. The psychological impact of proximity fuses also played a significant role. Japanese pilots faced intense anti-aircraft fire that seemed to track their movements with uncanny accuracy, leading many to fear near misses as lethal threats. This effect was so profound that German soldiers on the European front developed unprecedented dread of American artillery due to its ability to find targets missed by conventional ammunition. The detonations occurred precisely at the optimal altitude, irrespective of weather conditions or geographical features. There was nowhere deemed safe, no dependable safeguard existed, and there was no tactical response available either. The proximity fuse confirmed a pioneering model of military research and development that significantly influenced American defense strategy during the Cold War era and beyond. This project conclusively showed that civilian scientists, when provided with sufficient resources and clear goals, could tackle what seemed to be insurmountable technical obstacles. The cooperation between academic researchers at Johns Hopkins University, industrial manufacturers such as Crossley Corporation and Sylvania, along with military strategists, resulted in a war-winning weapon within 3 years of the initial concept. Both the technical ingenuity and the manufacturing prowess were equally impressive. The proximity fuse initiative ranks among the most remarkable production feats of World War II, comparable to those of the B-29 bomber and Liberty ship programs. At its peak in early 1945, more than 110 factories operated by over 87 different companies were involved in the manufacture of proximity fuses. This extensive network employed over 100,000 workers, many of whom had no idea what they were producing. The production journey started modestly. In August 1942, Crossley Corporation in Cincinnati received its first manufacturing contract. Powell Crossley Jr., who had made his fortune from radios and refrigerators, transformed his entire factory into a fuse production facility within weeks. Security measures were stringent. Workers underwent multiple security checks, wore color-coded badges limiting their access to specific areas, and had censored mail and monitored phone calls. They were strictly prohibited from discussing their work even with family members. Many believed they were manufacturing improved radio tubes for military radios. Crossley's manufacturing facility served as a benchmark for mass production efficiency. Workers were assigned specific tasks on the assembly line and trained to perform them repeatedly, often thousands of times each day. At one station, employees meticulously wound fine coils, while another handled precise connections with utmost accuracy. Every 10th unit was inspected by quality control experts to ensure consistency and reliability. By December 1942, Crossley had ramped up production to 500 units daily. Production surged to 3,000 units per day in December 1943, reaching a peak of 16,500 fuses every 24 hours in April 1945. RCA joined the production effort in September 1942 by converting an Indiana facility in Bloomington. Their experience with radio manufacturing was instrumental in enhancing assembly methods, reducing production time by 30%. Eastman Kodak's contribution extended beyond mere assembly. Their expertise in optics and chemical processes helped address challenges related to photoelectric cells used in certain fuse models. Additionally, they developed enhanced plastic components capable of enduring extreme temperatures. General Electric managed several production sites. One plant in Schenectady, New York, assembled complete fuses, but the company's most significant contribution came from a converted factory in Cleveland that previously manufactured Christmas tree lights. This facility produced the delicate tungsten filaments for vacuum tubes with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Even the slightest imperfection could lead to fuse failure. Sylvania Electric Products played a crucial role in tube production, operating a plant in Ipswich, Massachusetts, that employed 10,000 workers on 3 shifts and consumed enough electricity to power a small city year-round, with the exception of Christmas Day. Advanced air purification systems eliminated dust particles that could contaminate tubes. Staff members donned specialized attire to avoid generating static electricity. At peak production, the facility churned out about 1 million tubes every 2.5 days, accounting for roughly 95% of all proximity fuse tubes manufactured. By war's conclusion, Sylvania's Ipswich plant alone had produced 5 6083 Lero 32 complete fuses, surpassing any other single location in the country. Major corporations collaborated closely with numerous smaller specialized firms to achieve this feat. For instance, McQuay Norris Manufacturing Company in Set, Lewis fabricated metal components, Zenith Radio Corporation in Chicago assembled electronic modules, and Wurlitzer, renowned for organs and jukeboxes, crafted precise timing mechanisms. Even Lionel Corporation, known for toy trains, contributed by manufacturing specific parts. Each company brought unique skills that were instrumental in overcoming production hurdles. By the end of the war, American industry had produced over 22 million proximity fuses at a total cost exceeding $1 billion when adjusted to 1940s currency values. Mass production efficiencies led to a significant reduction in costs. Early hand-assembled fuses initially cost $7.32 each, more expensive than many automobiles. But by 1945, assembly line production had lowered the unit price to just $18. This remarkable 40-fold decrease made the weapons economically feasible for widespread deployment. Even at $18 per fuse, proximity-fused shells were considered cost-effective given their greatly improved kill rates. Rigorous quality control measures were implemented throughout the program, with every batch of fuses undergoing extensive testing at various stages. The National Bureau of Standards operated specialized testing facilities to ensure adherence to stringent standards. The fuses underwent rigorous testing in extreme temperatures ranging from 65 UF to + 60 F. They endured various tests such as humidity chambers, salt spray exposure vibration tables, and centrifuges that mimicked actual firing conditions. Random samples were tested by being fired to confirm their functionality. The failure rate had to stay below strict limits. Any batch showing issues prompted a thorough investigation of the entire production run. This meticulous quality control ensured reliable performance in combat from Arctic environments to tropical climates. The proximity fuse remained highly classified throughout the war, and despite millions of fuses being deployed on battlefields, Axis powers failed to reverse engineer or develop effective countermeasures against them. German engineers discovered some unexploded shells late in 1944, but found it inconceivable that functional radio equipment could survive inside artillery shells, leading them to believe the captured examples were either deceptions or failures. Consequently, they wasted resources investigating non-existent countermeasures. Japanese forces encountered similar challenges and constraints. During Pacific campaigns, particularly from naval bombardments onto land despite regulations, several proximity-fused dud shells fell into their hands. Although Japanese researchers grasped the fundamental concept, their electronics industry could not match the level of miniaturization required by American technology. By 1943, the gap between American and Japanese industrial capabilities had widened to such an extent that even with captured examples, Japan's industry was unable to produce equivalent weapons in significant quantities before the end of the war. James Forrestal, Secretary of the Navy, noted that proximity fuses played a crucial role in paving the way to victory over Japan. In his memoirs, General Eisenhower stated that if Germans had perfected and used proximity fuses 6 months earlier than the Allies did, the invasion of Europe would likely have been far more challenging, perhaps impossible. These assessments came from top military commanders who understood the critical nature of narrow margins between success and failure. However, for nearly 2 years, army leaders were denied access to this strategically vital weapon due to overly cautious institutional policies, which, while understandable, ultimately proved excessive. The Pentagon's security worries were justified, yet the danger of German reverse engineering was very real. However, the decision to uphold the embargo while American troops perished with inferior weaponry demonstrated a failure in strategic thinking. It favored potential future risks over current casualties. Only when the military situation became dire during the Battle of the Bulge did leadership finally approve what should have been authorized months prior. The proximity fuse was more than an enhancement for conventional weapons. It symbolized a significant shift in how military technology could be developed and deployed. This innovation proved that electronics and automation could dramatically improve weapon effectiveness, showing that even minor technological advancements could significantly impact entire campaigns if used correctly. Most importantly, it highlighted the necessity of not only scientific brilliance but also substantial industrial implementation and the courage to deploy new technologies despite potential risks. The sailors aboard Helena who fired the first combat shots in January 1943 were unaware they were ushering in a new era of warfare. They simply knew their shells were hitting targets that should have been out of reach. However, the officers commanding those forces, the generals deploying them, and the admirals organizing naval task forces around these capabilities understood that something fundamental had changed. Warfare had entered a phase where technological sophistication was as crucial as bravery and numbers. In less than 3 years, American researchers and manufacturers developed a weapon that transformed warfare, mass-produced it, deployed it across 2 theaters of operation, and utilized it to help secure victory in the largest conflict ever recorded. The proximity fuse, which the Navy initially kept secret, became essential for saving the Allied cause at its most critical moments. This transformation from impossible to indispensable underscores the potential of human ingenuity when survival is at stake. The history of the proximity fuse teaches us that achieving transformative military advantages often requires overcoming not only technical challenges but also institutional resistance and bureaucratic caution. Delaying innovation can be costly in terms of lives lost. Once unleashed, revolutionary technology has the power to alter the trajectory of history. The influence of proximity fuses extends well beyond their use during World War II. Today, every modern anti-aircraft missile is equipped with proximity fusing systems. Patriot missiles that defended against Scud attacks in the Gulf War relied on proximity fuses derived from the Mark 32 model. Naval close in weapon systems such as Phalanx, which safeguard ships from missile threats, utilize proximity fusing technology. Similarly, air-to-air missiles used by fighter aircraft around the world detonate using proximity fuse mechanisms. The innovations that were born out of wartime necessity became integral to modern air defense strategies. The scientists who developed the proximity fuse went on to influence American science for decades. James Van Allen discovered the radiation belts named after him, while many other Section T researchers became key figures in the space program. The Applied Physics Laboratory at Johns Hopkins University, which was established for the Proximity Fuse project, continues to be a leading defense research institution today. The collaborative model between universities, industry, and government that was set by the Proximity Fuse Initiative served as a blueprint for American technological development throughout the Cold War. Perhaps most significantly, the Proximity Fuse saved countless lives. Naval experts estimate that, without these fuses, American casualties in the Pacific could have been 30 to 50% higher. Kamikaze attacks might have compelled the cancellation of the Okinawa invasion, and an invasion of Japan planned for November 1945 would likely have faced insurmountable losses due to suicide missions. In Europe, proximity-fused artillery played a crucial role in preventing Allied forces from being split during the Battle of the Bulge. Without it, London might have been evacuated following relentless V-1 rocket attacks. The war could have continued into 1946 or even 1947, resulting in millions more casualties on all sides. The proximity fuse is a testament to how victories can come not just from courage alone, but also through the synergy of scientific innovation and industrial capability. Over 22 million small radars, each no larger than an ice cream cone, contributed significantly to winning the largest war ever recorded by human history. They achieved this by tackling what appeared to be an insurmountable challenge, transforming the open expanse of the sky into a lethal battlefield for enemy planes and providing the Allied forces with the critical advantage they required at precisely the right moment.